Okay, so do you want to do the intro or should I do the intro?
Do you have an intro plan?
No, I just have a lot of like disclaimers and apologies planned.
All right. I'll let you go. I'll let you start.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of Words About Books. Today, we're going to be talking about books nobody wanted to write and nobody wanted to read. This is, of course, the American Election 2020 Words About Books Election Extravaganza. I said election twice. We're keeping it in. And we're going to be talking about 5 of my favorite Trump takedown books. And I use the word favorite loosely. So Nate, what are your feelings on Donald Trump?
I think that I thought he was great until The Rock came out and endorsed Biden, so now I have to vote for Biden.
Are you sure you want to joke about that? No, so in all seriousness, yeah, we're going to be covering what is potentially a very contentious topic today. It's certainly contentious for our American listeners. And I just wanted to get a few things out of the way off the bat. We are covering 5 books today. Nate has not read them. I have read them, and I wanted to talk to him about them. I have a weird fascination with reading all these like inside the White House Donald Trump takedown books. It started with Fire and Fury, and then I just kept reading them. And I'll be honest with you, like most of these books don't offer a ton of new information or any new information really if you follow the news. It's just like a weird hobby of mine. So before we get started, this is we're gonna get into a little bit of politics here, but
What? You never told me that.
this is primarily a book podcast, okay? I'm not really here to talk about politics or try to sway your opinion on the election or who you vote for or any of that. The main reason I chose this topic is because we've been looking for a way to talk about nonfiction books on the podcast for about a year now. And it's kind of difficult to approach a nonfiction book simply as a book because when it comes to nonfiction, the subject matter, the topic really dominates. So if a person isn't interested in or familiar with the subject matter of a nonfiction book, then they're not going to get anything out of reading it. They're not going to get anything out of listening to a podcast on it. And there's kind of a second problem then for our podcast is how do we discuss the quality and content of a nonfiction book without becoming experts on the subject of that book? So like you're not going to cover Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time and say it's a bad book unless you're a physicist, you know? So
No, I'll complain about how boring it was.
did you read it?
No.
I was going to say it's not actually that boring.
Oh my god. Now I have to read it.
I'll lend you a copy. So that brings me to the deluge of books about Donald Trump. And I had a thought, and that thought was whether they wanted to or not, most of our listeners have some familiarity with Donald Trump. And likely, most of you also have an opinion on Donald Trump, and that gets me past the subject matter hurdle. We all have some degree of familiarity with the topic, and as readers, it's not unreasonable to think that some of you may be interested in reading more about the topic. And as far as the format of the podcast goes, the sheer number and variety of books published about Donald Trump in the last 4 years is incredible, and I've read many of them. So that gives me a little bit of format here. So let me explain how we're going to do this. I'm going to talk about 5 of these books, and there are just so many more. What I consider a Donald Trump takedown book is either a reporter, somebody familiar, like some insider, writes a book to tell you what really is going on in the White House. And just the there's so many of them, and it's kind of strange because you would think, how often can you say the same thing? Pretty often, as it turns out. So I'm going to kind of rank these for you, and for Nate especially because
Thank you.
he doesn't like to read.
That's true. Yeah, that's what I've heard.
So I'm going to be ranking them worst to best in order of how I think you should read them, and I'm going to be ranking them on three criteria: the quality of the information, the quality of the writing, and whether or not there's any kind of unique perspective. And I'll give a quick admission of my bias. If you haven't already guessed or gleaned from previous episodes of this podcast, or from the topic of this episode, I don't care much for President Trump.
What? You never told me this.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not a fan.
Son of a bitch.
Politically, I'll just admit, if you've ever followed me on Twitter, you will know I'm left-leaning. I am actually an independent, though. I'm not a huge fan of the Democratic Party either. I will be voting for Biden, but if you're not, that's fine. I'm not here to judge or attempt to change anyone's mind. I really just want to talk about the books. So, with that in mind, Nate, do you have any thoughts? Are you ready to start? Are you just trying to stay quiet so nobody blames you for this?
A little of all of those things. I guess I'll say I'm also left-leaning, and I'm registered as a Democrat just so I can vote in primaries, but the Democratic Party is also some hot, spicy garbage.
You're choosing your words less carefully than I did.
Yeah.
But I don't disagree.
Yeah, so I think both of the main two political parties can suck it, and they're awful, but if I had to pick one of the two evils, there you go. Is that carefully chosen words?
Not at all. You're gonna get a ton of hate.
Well, that's at WAB Pod on Twitter. Just send all your hate over there.
I was gonna say we shouldn't view it as hate. We should view it as engagement.
Yeah.
So
I'm engaging you aggressively.
I'm gonna list the books I'm gonna be covering, and then I'm gonna ask you if you've heard of any of these or if you know anything about any of these as we go. So I'm going to be covering in reverse order of how much I like them. Fire and Fury Inside the Trump White House by Micheal Wolff. Fear, Trump in the White House by Bob Woodward. Too Much and Never Enough, How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man by Mary L. Trump, Ph.D. The Room Where It Happened. I think there's a subtitle for that, but I forget. By John Bolton. John Bolton, interestingly enough, received a $2 million advance for that book. Keep that in mind. And Rage by Bob Woodward. The latest. Well, maybe not the latest, but like the latest of the good Trump books. So, Nate, do you know any of those books? Do you remember any of them?
So I saw Fire and Fury on bookshelves. Either that or Fear. It was one or the other. And I went, gee, I wonder what that's going to be about. I can only imagine that it's the same shit that's been playing out on our TVs and in the news cycle and on Twitter for years. I bet that that's not a whole lot of new information. And I just walked right past it because I don't give a shit. And as we established, I hate books. And I knew about Mary Trump's book, and that's about the extent of it, that it was Mary Trump. I did know about Bolton's book, though, and I was interested the most in reading Bolton's book, even though I'm not a particular fan of Bolton himself.
I don't know that anyone is. I assume his
Do you
mother
think John
likes
Bolton
him.
is a fan of John Bolton?
I honestly don't know. Well, no, I do know. Yes, he is. I forgot I read his book.
Yeah, John Bolton's his number one fan, right?
Yeah. So, Number 5. Fire and Fury Inside the Trump White House by Micheal Wolff. So this was kind of the first of the Trump takedown books that I remember. I think it was like the first big one where it was going to like spill all the tea, dish all the hot goss. This is like inside the White House. Micheal Wolff, for some reason, is a reporter who had like unusual access to the White House. But this book was written mostly about like the first year or two of the Trump presidency. If you can remember the long ago, the before time, there was a man named Steve Bannon, and he ran Trump's campaign, and he was something of like an alt-right. Again, that's like kind of a phrase from the long ago too. He was something of an alt-right figurehead.
He asked for everyone to raise their right hand and hail Trump.
It's not a good look anyway. Like Steve Bannon is not who you want to run your campaign if you're trying to unite people, we should say.
So let me back up there. Are they trying to unite people, Ben? Is that what they've been trying to do?
I'm here to talk about the books. So
okay. All right. We'll move on.
That could easily turn into the whole podcast. I'm going to read you my reviews of these books because I actually read this one quite a long time ago when most of the characters in it were still in the White House. Fire and Fury is the chronicling of office gossip from the early days of the Trump presidency. And I think that Steve Bannon may deserve a co-author credit, as it seems he wrote the second half of the book. Wolff describes a chaotic White House filled with hucksters and opportunists who are doomed by their own accidental success. Factions quickly form, leading to an ongoing battle between the president's family, Steve Bannon's alt-righters, and the establishment Republicans. Their struggle for influence in the administration, combined with the president's lack of discipline, leads to much mind-boggling behavior and policy that we've seen so far. Which is to say, it kind of states the obvious.
No shit.
He gives like vivid details, including tones of voice and facial expressions. Like he describes it like a narrative, but the only problem is he wasn't there. So,
that is kind of a problem.
He's describing like Steve Bannon talking to Roger Stone and what tone of voice and facial expression was used, and it's like, how could you possibly know that? You're like, it's very transparently just made up. I'm gonna not that all the content of the book is made up, but it's like very transparently like biased. Like, I don't know. He's not even trying to do honest journalism. He's trying to tell like a spicy story, and it's like, I don't know, man. I'm gonna rank these books on 3 criteria. Okay.
Alrighty.
Quality of information. So this basically refers to how credible I find the information versus how much speculating the author does. It's a big problem for Micheal Wolff. Since each of these books is kind of intended to inform as well as entertain, weak arguments and weak sources are going to lose you points. Now, I'm not an expert, so if I rank something as having quality information, that's to the best of my judgment. You may have a different opinion.
So you're saying that your rankings are in fact subjective and not objective, and that people on the internet can't seem to figure that out.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm just
People get mad when you give a movie review lower than what they think it deserved.
I'm just admitting when it comes to quality of information, I'm not the guru here. So I'm going to I'm just kind of doing a basic, does it pass like a sniff test? And Micheal Wolff, for example, how can you tell me what Roger Stone's facial expression was when you admitted you weren't present for that conversation?
Well, he's got ESP.
So that's an example of something that I find not credible. You're sensationalizing a bit. And that's fine, because like I said, these are to entertain as well. But I'm going to say it harms you because we need good information in our nonfiction books. The second factor is going to be the quality of the writing. Words About Books is, at its core, a podcast dedicated to studying the craft of writing. So, therefore, we shall take into account style, prose, accessibility, and wit. And the third is a little bonus, uniqueness of perspective. And like I said, there's a lot of these books, more every day, and it's fairly safe to say there are more than there need to be. So I will give an author points if they bring some kind of unique perspective to the conversation.
Are you trying to tell me that you don't think this guy brought a unique perspective on maybe Trump bad ?
No. So on all three of those criteria, on the first criteria, I think I've already established, I don't find the quality of information particularly good. I don't think that any of the major story beats are wrong, but he does try to present them as story beats.
He really should. Would it have been better if he just leaned all the way in and like just made it like a fantasy book with
Micheal
strong
Wolff,
allegories?
As near as I can tell, just my own personal opinion, he had this access. He knew, like, he saw how much attention this was getting in the news, and he knew any book that was even remotely competent is going to sell.
Fuck, why didn't we get in on that?
Because we didn't have access.
We could have just written a book based on what we saw on Twitter and the news.
What is that thing that those fandom menace fucks always says? Like, well, the access media.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh my God.
I don't know if I want to know. I feel like my life is a little better not knowing. Actually.
I promised I would not bring Star Wars into this.
Actually, that was you.
Yeah.
I was gonna bring it in later.
Basically, it's the fandom menace considers the access media to be like, all the legitimate media that people actually want to talk to, and therefore they have access. Not just some guy in his basement with a beard and a mic. I'm probably gonna have to cut all that.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the second criteria of writing quality, I'm gonna say that this is average. It's accessible. It's readable. It's incorrigibly douchey.
Yeah, I see here that you're talking about how he used a lot of French words. Does that not give him points, Ben? He is a learned man.
He seems, the weirdest thing is that he seems to be writing this book for like the everyman until he starts saying things like, I don't know, this is not an exact quote, but he says stuff all the time like, foreign policy was a bit of a bête noire for Trump. And it's like, if you don't speak French, that kind of...
I don't see anything wrong with that. He's just trying to let his readers know that he's above them a little bit. He's credible because he's smarter than you. He knows a French word, Ben.
But the thing is, like, I've never heard in American English somebody referred to like a nemesis or a pet problem as a bête noire.
Yeah, I've never heard of that either. Apparently, similar is bugbear.
Yeah, I mean, it means like black beast. Literally, it means that. But maybe it's a common phrase in like Quebec or France, but it's not a common phrase here. And so I don't know who...
He's a cultured man, Ben.
But it's the wrong culture. He's trying to reach an American audience, and I got to imagine...
Don't the Americans really love the French? Come on.
Does anyone really love the French? Anyway, so I want to mention another of his favorite phrases is joie de guerre, the joy of war. And he uses this one as like Steve Bannon's really like riling up those leftists. It's the joie de guerre. And I'm like, okay, this is getting a little it's getting a little cringy now. I can't imagine Steve Bannon speaking French. I got to imagine that would just get him kicked right out of all his clubs.
Do you think maybe Steve Bannon speaks French in secret? Like when he's all alone, he actually is a Frenchman in disguise, sent to infiltrate our society.
For the final criteria, uniqueness of perspective, it's 0. 0 for Micheal Wolff. It was basically just a restatement of all the big headlines at the time. I don't know if you can remember back to 2016, 2017, but there was a lot of
long ago. The beginning of this year, I can hardly remember, Ben. You remember when coronavirus wasn't a thing? God, I remember those times.
There was like, Jared Kushner, the Jared Ivanka faction versus the Steve Bannon faction. There was a lot made of that in the media. And basically Micheal Wolff came along and said like, yeah, I talked to some people. It's totally true.
So like, this is like a somehow even worse version of Game of Thrones, is what you're telling me.
I would not even be talking about this book if it were not the first, and he definitely rushed to make it the first. So that brings me to number 4, Fear, Trump in the White House by Bob Woodward. Here's my Goodreads review from the long, long ago when I read this. It's hard for me to talk about this book without comparing it to Fire and Fury by Micheal Wolff. It doesn't help that I read them back to back, which I did.
What a terrible idea.
I just read one and then the other. Both books caused a media stir when they came out. Both describe a disturbing lack of organization, discipline, and competence in the White House. In Fear, Bob Woodward seems to have painted a far more realistic picture of the Trump presidency than that of Fire and Fury. If you need to read one book on the Trump presidency so far, keep in mind I wrote this in 2018, I would say it should be Fear. With that said, I actually wrote this in my Goodreads review. With that said, Trump may have unintentionally succeeded in being the most transparent president in history because very little of this book was news to me. If you've been following politics at all, you kind of know what this book says.
Was it Trump maybe secretly bad? Question mark?
It was just, Trump didn't expect to win. He wasn't super prepared to take over. He trusts his family more than he trusts establishment politicians. His family's not very good at it. Did you know that?
I would never have expected that Trump didn't think he would win. Maybe if fucking FBI Director Comey didn't come out and sway the vote at the last minute, he wouldn't have. Although, then we would have gotten Hillary. Oh, no. Oh, God. So, the book is called Fear, Trump in the White House. Who is the fear? Who is fearful? Is it the American people? Is it Trump himself? Who's afraid of this?
I think it was just... It's a sensationalized title for a surprisingly sober book. I guess this goes to quality of information a little bit. I'm going to say this has good quality of information. Bob Woodward is a pretty respected journalist. He goes by multiple sources. He attempts to confirm everything he hears, and he doesn't do a lot of sensational expressions and
what? Well, then it's not interesting to me, the average American reader. I need someone to be like, he paused and he took a deep breath and he looked off at stage right, and then he let out his breath, and then he said his thing in a dramatic way. It reverberated throughout the halls.
Well, you should probably check out Micheal Wolff's second book. So the fear, I think, that Bob Woodward is referring to is just kind of the theme of this presidency.
That makes sense.
He was elected, I won't say like solely based on fear, but he ran kind of a fear-based campaign. Fear of illegal immigrants, fear of China, fear of all these issues that only Trump can protect you from. That's sort of the angle of his campaign, is there's all these bad things coming. I'm the only one who can save you.
There are these terrible things coming, like a massive outbreak. That's going to happen.
And he'll save us, right?
No. Yeah. I remember that time that he saved us. He saved himself using... Anyway.
Oh my goodness. I was afraid I was going to be the one getting political on this. Like, I was thinking like, oh, Nate's not going to say anything because Nate never wants to get controversial. And man, you are just done.
All right, go back to the book. Fear.
To answer your question, that's where the fear comes from. As for the quality of his writing, like I said, it's pretty journalistic, not boring. It's accessible. He doesn't use a lot of jargon. I think it's a pretty good book for informing oneself. But where I gotta rank this book fairly low, and this is a big factor, is uniqueness of perspective. This is, even among Bob Woodward books written about Trump, not very unique. And unfortunately, it is hopelessly outdated. So as a historical artifact, this book is good. Maybe 10 years later, if you want to read about the Trump presidency, you start with this one. But it's probably not what you want to read in 2020. Because just by the nature of the Trump presidency, most of the people talked about in this book are not there anymore. So it's the dynamics have shifted completely. This is not going to help you get a very good handle on what's going on into 2020. And if there were a second term, it's not going to help you at all with that.
Let's go on to Mary Trump. Mary L. Trump.
Number 3.
So, real quick, I understand that she did not do this for the money. And being the charitable soul, she is donating 100% of the proceeds to a charity of our choice. Is that right?
I won't... I don't know. I don't know how much Mary Trump donates. I don't know anything about that. I do wonder about it, though, because there's multiple times where she says, like, I didn't write this book for the money. I didn't sue my family for the money. And I just think, like, it's okay if you want to get paid for your work. Like, if you don't think you deserve the money, you probably shouldn't sue for the money. That's my one issue with Mary Trump is I didn't do it for the money. I did it for the country. Also, I'll get paid. This book wasn't quite what I expected. I don't think it's quite what it's advertised as either. It mostly lives up to the subtitle of How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. It's essentially a collection of Trump family lore and stories.
Oh my God.
Stories that Mary Trump was able to collect and compile into a book. It is only tangentially about Donald Trump, but it attempts to place Donald Trump into a much needed context. So if the book were to have a main character, it would actually be Fred Trump, Donald's father. And I don't think Donald would disagree that Fred Trump had an enormous impact on shaping Donald's worldview, his business philosophy, maybe not his business philosophy because Fred Trump never accrued debt, but...
Ouch. maybe not his business philosophy because Fred was actually good, but
Fred Trump's businesses turned to profit, which Donald hasn't quite cracked. Well, he cracked it with The Apprentice. That is the one Trump endeavor that has made money. And that is probably why he is so obsessed with television, because that is like the one thing he's been really good at, because God knows it's not real estate. But Fred Trump and the way Donald grew up, it really shaped Donald's worldview. And Mary describes Fred Trump as charitably, emotionally distant, and not so charitably, an outright sociopath who pitted his children against one another to see who would rise to the top like lions. Again, yeah, that makes sense. Like that's
yeah, I buy it.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. I didn't think Trump had a happy, nurturing home life. I never got that vibe. It is an interesting look into what has become the most powerful family on the planet. And Mary Trump definitely has some bias because she and her branch of the family have been pretty wronged by the rest of them. She's basically been kicked out of the family. I mean, certainly after this book, she's been kicked out of the family. A lot of the book covers the relationship between Fred Trump and his son Fred Jr., who was Mary's father. And Fred Jr. was kind of the chosen heir to the Trump family business, and he didn't want it.
Why not?
He just wasn't interested in real estate, to be honest. I think he was mostly interested in being a pilot, which was a fairly new thing at the time. And Fred Trump Sr. just didn't respect that at all and thought it was a total betrayal when his son didn't want to take over the family business. And they had a big falling out. Fred Trump Jr. wound up drinking a lot and eventually died as a result. And his portion of the inheritance, so all the Trump children got like an even cut of their father's inheritance, except the dead one, Fred Trump Jr., and that was just sort of rolled into the other's inheritance. And this is where Mary wound up suing her family, is she thought she and her brother should receive their father, what would have been their father's portion of the inheritance.
Is that something you get to dictate, though? Is that lawsuit ongoing?
No.
Okay, did she win anything?
No.
I didn't think so.
It gets really complicated. I mean, I could spend the entire episode talking about the dynamics between Mary Trump and her family. To go to uniqueness of perspective, this is perhaps the most unique perspective on this list. It's not super about Donald, which is probably why it's the most unique, but it places him in a very interesting context. And it places the entire Trump family in a very interesting context. Because there are more Trumps than I realized. And they're in more places than I realized. Like, one of them's a federal judge. I think I had heard that. I think I'd heard that before, but I don't know. It never really clicked for me until I read this book that, like, oh, yeah, she is, isn't she? She is a federal judge. Shit.
Well, let's nominate her to the Supreme Court.
I don't think Donald would ever give her that, because then she wouldn't be under his thumb anymore. It's interesting. It's a very interesting book. It's, as far as quality of information goes, I'm going to say poor to average. It is Mary Trump's personal account. So these are stories she either personally remembers or were relayed to her secondhand. And she's very upfront about that. In this case, I don't actually mean the poor information quality is a bad thing, because she's very honest about what this is. She's not trying to tell you these are the objective facts of the case. She does say this is how I remember it.
Does she add mannerism?
To an extent. So I'll be honest with you. I listened to the audiobook of this one, which is read by the author, and she definitely does voices.
Does she do an imitation of Donald?
No, she doesn't. She doesn't do an outright imitation of anybody, but like, she makes her voice deeper when she's reading the quote from a man and all that. But she applies she definitely adds the emotion she thinks the statement was said with to her own voice in the audiobook. So that influenced me somewhat. I don't know if that's there in the text. I don't think it is. I think the text is pretty much plain, but she is reconstructing conversations sort of as they were told to her. And let's keep in mind the sources here. Everybody's got a financial and emotional stake in these stories. Everybody's got tons of emotion wrapped up in this. So this is, like when you go to like Thanksgiving with your family and the siblings all start telling stories of how like they grew up.
My dad and his siblings, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So it's kind of like getting to be a fly on the wall at a Trump Thanksgiving dinner when all of Fred Trump's children talk about how they grew up.
Christ.
Yeah, it's pretty depressing. Not a lot of happy memories there. A lot of lying about how much money we have. In Fred Trump's case, a lot of lying about how much money he had in a very different way than Donald lies about how much money he has.
How so?
Fred didn't want the government to know how much money he had.
Ah.
He didn't. That's the thing. Fred Trump did not accrue debt. He had valuable Manhattan real estate, and he made money on it. And it's an interesting character. You should read the book. If this sounds interesting to you, I would recommend this one.
Anything else on Mary Trump?
No, not really. She has her PhD in psychology, so she does psychoanalyze a little bit.
Yeah. Are you going to say she also outranks me? Like Sarah Fine? You jackass.
I wasn't even going to bring it up, but I'm glad. I'm glad you're not insecure. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I'm also glad that I'm not insecure. Takes a big man to admit that. And that's what I am. A big man.
Yeah, so that's number 3.
All right.
Number 4.
That was number 2.
Oh, shit. Number 2. The Room Where It Happened by John Bolton, who was given a $2 million advance for writing this book.
I could go for $2 million right about now. If anyone wants me to write a Trump book and wants to give me $2 million, like, I'll do it.
Real quick, if you do not know who John Bolton is, he is a man with a fantastic mustache who has been
I was going to say I hate his mustache. And
you hate his mustache?
Yeah.
Now, do you hate his mustache just because you hate him?
That definitely plays a part in it. For
I was
sure.
gonna say, if you put that mustache on like a neutral figure,
Okay, I'll give you that. It's not as good as Poirot.
no, it's not as good as Poirot.
No.
But if we're
It's
being
up there.
we got to be fair and objective in our analysis, Nate.
I thought it was fair and balanced.
People come to us at Words About Books for high quality, objective, unbiased information. And we got to give credit where credit is due. John Bolton's mustache is...
Okay, John Bolton has a stupid face with a glorious mustache. How is that?
That is accurate.
Okay.
That is the truth. We've gotten to the bottom of it. Also, he's kind of a monster. So,
Yeah.
John Bolton is a... I don't really know how to define his role. He's kind of a foreign policy wonk. He's worked in, I believe, the last 3 Republican administrations, counting Trump's. And he, in various roles, he's been our ambassador to the UN. He's been, I don't know if he's been Secretary of State. He was definitely Trump's head of the NSC.
Yeah, he was the ambassador of the UN despite the fact that he, hated the UN.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's the other thing. Bolton is famously hawkish. He's one of the most, I won't say war-loving, but certainly war-tolerant of the Republican politicians. The way I would describe John Bolton is he's a anti-globalist. He believes in the sovereignty of nations, and he believes it is our right to protect our interest with military force around the world. And he is not opposed to using our military force in situations where it would benefit us, regardless of what happens to the people in the other country.
Well, they're not our people, so...
That's it. I would say John Bolton does not place a high value on non-American human life.
Does he place a high value on American life?
To an extent.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like a chess match to Bolton. War does not actually mean human beings killing one another. It just means strategic resources being spent here or there. That's sort of how he views things.
It's always reassuring when you're viewed as a strategic resource.
I've ranked this book fairly highly on my list. John Bolton's not dumb. I want to be very clear about that. He's an intelligent man, and his reasoning is not bad. His positions are not logically inconsistent or anything like that. He tends to pick wars he would win. It's just, it's some of the most cruel, dispassionate, it's just hard for me to imagine how he doesn't care that it's people who are going to be dying. And I want to point out one slight hypocrisy, because I'm not a fan of John Bolton. And the main reason I'm not a fan of John Bolton, I could almost forgive his warlike tendencies if he were some kind of soldier who participated in these wars and saw what they were like and thought they were necessary. Not so. John Bolton was in the National Guard during Vietnam, and he very specifically joined the National Guard because the National Guard was not being sent to Vietnam. And he has admitted in interviews he had no desire to fight in Vietnam. That is the end of John Bolton's military service. John Bolton's book constantly places him at odds with Mattis, who is a 5-star general. And he's always painting Mattis as this guy who just, for whatever reason, doesn't want to go to war. He's afraid to conduct military operations, blah, 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 blah. And it's I kind of got to go with Mattis on this one as a guy...
Who was there?
Who's done some war. And he doesn't think it's a good thing.
So did John Bolton approve of Vietnam? He liked Vietnam? We needed to stop them?
No, he didn't.
Interesting. Now, was that just because he was being drafted or he was going to go over
I imagine that made it much more real for him, yeah. But I can't put myself in his head. I don't know why he opposed it exactly. I haven't read extensively on what he said about that.
So we should go back to having the people who declare war at the head of armies, is what you're saying.
Bolton has, like, in his own book, for example, it comes up that Trump might want to send troops into Venezuela, and Bolton cautions against that.
Oh,
So
okay. Why does he caution against that? What's the reasoning?
he thinks that there are ways to achieve regime change without an American military presence, and he wants Trump to aggressively support those. Like I said, he's not dumb. He's not a psychopath, I don't think. He doesn't want to kill a bunch of people. He just doesn't care if a bunch of people die.
Okay.
So anyway, John Bolton's book, this is kind of an account of John Bolton's time in the White House. He was Trump's national security advisor from 2018 to 2019. And so this book is essentially John Bolton's diary of the entire Trump presidency. It starts off with Trump being elected, where John Bolton expects he may get the Secretary of State job. He's interviewed a number of times to come in and work for Trump. Trump doesn't want to offer him the jobs he wants. So, like, this goes on. This is a very long book. I'm not going to give the whole summary here. But basically, it's kind of a memoir of Bolton's, of the not the 4 years, but the 3 years he was involved in the Trump presidency. And it's very interesting. He describes the same general lack of discipline, the same disarray in the Trump White House that all the other books describe. But John Bolton has a very interesting foreign policy perspective on it. He really goes into how Trump's foreign policy is non-existent or just like spur of the moment, whatever he thinks of at the time, and how he tried to rein that in and failed. And he talks about all the infighting with Mattis and all that stuff. And this is also the famous book where John Bolton confirms that, yes, Trump inappropriately asked Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden's son.
Was that not one of the sticking points for impeachment, Ben?
That was the main point for impeachment.
You're saying that John Bolton said, yeah, that happened, and Donald Trump was in fact not impeached. Is that right?
He was impeached. He was not convicted.
You're right. Sorry. He was impeached, but he was not convicted. Okay. I just wanted to get everything out.
Yeah, and if you're not familiar, the controversy surrounding this book was the book was trying to be held up by Donald Trump. The White House did not want this book approved. They said John Bolton was releasing classified information to the public of his own accord. And during the impeachment trial, or during the impeachment hearings, it came out that John Bolton's book contained evidence, testimony, basically, of the fact that this had happened. I think this, I'm trying to remember the exact sequence of events. I think it came out after, for whatever reason, they either subpoenaed him and he wouldn't come, or Trump suppressed the subpoena. John Bolton said he would testify at the Senate if he was subpoenaed. And the Senate, of course, did not want him to testify, so they did not subpoena him. And the Senate said, like, we're not going to have witnesses at the trial. So everybody then knew that there was this book that was about to be published that corroborated the allegations, and that John Bolton could corroborate the allegations if he wanted to, but for legal hold-up shenanigan reasons, we weren't going to be able to have that proof at the trial. And so...
Well, I mean, who needs witnesses or proof, right?
Well, it certainly goes a long way if you don't want to convict the person you're trying to not have witnesses or proof of the crime.
Yeah, who needs them?
Again, we're getting into the political here.
Yeah, you're right. We need to bulldoze Congress into a landfill, and then anyway, go on. What were you saying about Bolton?
I just wanted to give you the context for why this book was so important. I think it's let's get to my criteria, because I have a hard time.
Rails.
I have a hard time not wandering into the politics of this one, but that's actually to the book's credit, because I find John Bolton's account very interesting. Quality of information, I think it's pretty good. I don't know how John Bolton has kept all these notes. It is a memoir.
He probably has a little diary that he writes it all in.
He may very well, because he recounts like the times meetings happened 2 years ago. Like, he definitely has some documentation.
Okay, now does he add, and then, we sighed and we looked off into the distance. Like, does he add the all that flavor, that delicious flavor text?
No.
You're
To an
really,
extent, he describes, like, there are many events in the book that happen that were also leaked to the press. And they're like, so-and-so had a shouting match with so-and-so. John Bolton will dive into that and clarify that he raised his voice. He said the F word, but it didn't. I wouldn't call it a shouting match. He does that sort of thing. He also has like little. Hang on, let me pull up my Kindle here. He gets sassy.
Ooh.
Like, he gets surprisingly sassy.
Does he start snapping his fingers and saying, "You don't know me like that, girlfriend"?
Kinda.
Now I kind of want to read this book even more.
Okay, like, an example is, this is John Bolton, the Walrus of War. He describes Trump's relationship with Kim Jong-un as a bromance. He uses that word.
Ooh.
And I'm like, let me find another one. He's like, this is an exact quote from the book. Given the experiences already recounted here, and more, why accept the job? Because America faced very dangerous international environment, and I thought I knew what needed to be done. I had strong views on a wide range of issues, developed during prior government service and private sector study. And Trump? No one could claim by this point not to know the risks in store, but I also believed I could handle it. Others may have failed for one reason or another, but I thought I could succeed. Was I right? Read on. He was not. He got fired.
I thought I could train him better than Yoda. I was wrong. No. Okay. All right. Let's move on quickly.
No, he has a lot of like sassy bitch moments. And where he just adds those like little like jabs that don't need to be there. And he's doing it just to be a little bitch. And there's a downside though, in that he constantly walks, like, he adds little bits here and there. Some of them are funny little sassy drama queen moments. Others are insufferably douchey. Like, he constantly needs to remind you how well read he is. He references.
Does he bring up French words?
No, he would. He would. Actually, he's got a lot of opinions on the French. He does talk about the French a lot.
Oh man,
he doesn't
in a good way, I assume.
He does not like Macron at all. He thinks Macron is a total douche. But he quotes Thomas Hobbes, like all the conservative hits. Well, all the intellectual conservative hits. Thomas Hobbes, Greek philosophy. He compares Trump to Thucydides at one point. And I had to comment, like, yes, I've often also thought that Trump's sense of honor was Thucydidean. So I guess in that sense, like, quality of information, good. Quality of writing, meh. I mean, it's a lot. This book is like over 600 pages, and it can get a little tedious. Like, I don't need every detail of John Bolton's day. I'm sure 500 years from now, this will be very interesting to historians.
Oh, they had coffee shops back then?
John Bolton has a lot of breakfast meetings, I'll tell you that.
Well, yeah. You need to have a meeting and you need to eat. You just don't have time for both. So, what do? The breakfast meeting.
Number 1! Rage by Bob Woodward.
Shadow Legend. If you go to rageshadowlegends.com/wordsaboutbooks, you'll get 1,000 gems and 200 gold coins, and your first champion is free, and it helps out our podcast.
See, Raid, we're ready. We're ready for the big leagues, Raid.
It is Raid, isn't it?
We want that Raid Shadow Legends money. Yes, it's Rage, you fucking... Oh, God. This is another one of those podcasts that's gone on too long.
Yeah, it's gone off the fucking rails.
Yep. Rage by Bob Woodward. So this is the sequel to Fear by Bob Woodward. One of the big sticking points of Fear was that he could not get an interview with Donald Trump. Now, Bob Woodward is a pretty respected journalist. He's covered every president, and he's covered pretty much every president since Nixon, right? And he's interviewed all of them, I think. But for some reason, Donald Trump's people would not grant him an interview. I wonder why. So then the book came out, and I guess Donald Trump called Bob Woodward and was like, "Yo, this book you wrote about me sucks. This is totally unfair. You don't even know me." And Bob Woodward's like, "Well, I tried to talk to you, and they wouldn't let me." He's like, "Who did you talk to?" And he did actually talk to like 6 people in the Trump administration, and I think Trump realized that they didn't bring it to his attention. I think they were trying to save Trump from this. So for Rage, Trump actually sat for several interviews with Bob Woodward. Ooh. Several recorded interviews with Bob Woodward.
So I'm guessing the book is like, and then Trump said that he was great. And then Trump said that he had a lot of people on that. And then Trump said, like, no?
No.
No? Wow. Okay.
So a good chunk of the book...
Just cut that out.
A good chunk of the book... Have you not heard about the Bob Woodward interviews?
No.
Oh my God, dude.
Ben, I feel like my life is better not knowing about this shit as much as possible. Because American politics suck, and I think save us all the trouble. That's my hot take.
Bob Woodward recently released a tape of Donald Trump saying, "I always wanted to downplay the virus. I love downplaying the virus."
Oh, that was him.
That was him.
Hey, the virus is nothing to be afraid of if you've got some stem cells that you can just inject into your fucking face or whatever.
If you're going to read a book on the Trump presidency, just simply on the facts of the case, what happened, how it happened, how relevant is it to where we are today, this is your book. Quality of information, very good. Comes straight from the source. He has several recorded interviews with Donald Trump. He has multiple interviews with other people. He has multiple sources to back up pretty much everything he's heard. He fact-checks conversations. Like when he describes interview conversations, he fact-checks them in real time. If a claim is made, he will add a little note saying that this is the actual fact. Sometimes it comes off a little snarky. And a little petty, like when Trump says something about like the distance from the United States to Korea is this, and he's like, it's actually this. But I respect
how many light years?
Yeah, a fraction of one. The quality of the writing, good. Quality of the information, I'd say probably top notch for these sorts of books. If you don't like Bob Woodward, I don't want to say this is tough for me because is it a flattering book to Trump? No. But if you simply listen to the interviews with Donald Trump, I think Bob Woodward's questions are very fair, and I think very often Bob Woodward can't help but try to guide Trump to the right answer, and Trump resists and doubles down on the wrong answer. And so I'm going to say this is fair. Like I said, I don't like Trump. I don't think it paints a very flattering picture of Trump, but I don't think the reality is very flattering. So that's where I'm coming from with this. But I'd say it is the most fair, the most well reported, pretty well written. I'd actually say this book kind of replaces Fear in a lot of ways. I think Fear may be interesting if you're trying to like gauge the mood of politics in the years where it was written, but Rage is the book you want to read right now. As for uniqueness of perspective, it's not super unique because it is just a very straightforward covering of the Trump presidency, but it is the top tier of that. I have not encountered a better book attempting to just do a straightforward coverage of the presidency. So if you got to read one, I would say read Rage by Bob Woodward. Nate, do you have any thoughts?
No. We'll just go into final thoughts. But...
Okay. My final thoughts. What have I learned? What have I gleaned from this exercise of...
You've gleaned that you have one of those personalities where once you start a series of something, you have to see it through.
That is a big part of it. Honestly, my fascination with the Trump presidency, like with these books in particular, it's not even political, really. I like history and I like drama, and this is both. It's just both. Like, the Trump presidency is such a fascinating combination of factions and infighting and intrigue, and it's funny, it's sad, it's frustrating. Like, they really are interesting books. Like, they're entertaining more than anything. Because if you're really looking to be informed, Rage is a good book to be informed, but you really need to consume a lot of news sources. You need to have a big media diet that goes beyond simply books. But these books are actually interesting, and reading a bunch of them gives you a lot of different angles. And having read so many of these books, I do kind of feel like I understand Donald Trump's decision making a little bit. I feel like I understand the man better. And believe it or not, I would say it actually led to me disliking him less. As weird as that's going to be, I don't think he should be president. I'm not a fan of him, but like, I kind of get him, and I'm not very surprised by things he does. And I don't know. I just, in a weird way, reading all these Trump books helped me relax a little bit during the Trump presidency. I don't know if it's going to have that effect for everyone. I think I might be a little weird, but I don't know. Maybe it's just some bizarre sense of like, oh, I understand it. Now I can, at least I know what's going to kill me.
Oh, now I understand what's going to kill me. That's what you're taking away from this?
I understand the thing now.
I understand how fucked we are?
Yeah.
Okay.
It helped me make peace with it.
I guess that's something.
Have I inspired you to read any books, Nate?
I hate books, as we established. But I'm thinking about Bolton. That's about the only one I'm leaning towards. I don't know if I have the stomach or the heart to fucking listen to any of this other shit. I feel like that's what you're here for. You're here to just give me the summaries, and I'm here to just absorb them.
This is another thing we haven't ever really been able to cover on the podcast, but we kind of would like to, is we both have an interest in history.
And we both really want to talk about foreign policy.
Yeah, we do. But yeah, I would say the John Bolton one, John Bolton and Mary Trump are probably my favorites. But I think Rage is the best, if you're trying to inform yourself.
And I'm not.
And Micheal Wolff is just trash. I'm going to go ahead and make that blanket statement right now. I would never read another Micheal Wolff book again. Of all the books on this list, that is the only one I regret reading.
You know, my boss asked me in 2016 who I was voting for, and
that's inappropriate.
Who I wanted to win. And she was like, yeah, I don't know what to think about Trump. And I was like, oh, I know what to think about Trump. And 4 years later, I still know what I think about Trump. I don't think I need more information to make my mind up. So the election is 2 days from now. So that'll be fun. Next week, our monthly book. That is How to Pick Up Women with a Drunk Space Ninja by Jay Key.
Yeah. So, with that, thank you guys. Remember to check out the Twitter, check out the Goodreads group. You can check out our writing at poorlywritten.ninja. You can check out our additional show notes and commentary at blog.wordsaboutbooks.ninja. And while you're at it, don't forget to check out our sister podcast, Words About Games.
And hey, if you like this episode, then 4 years from now, we'll do one on Howie Hawkins after they become president.
The fuck is Howie Hawkins?
The Green Party.
4 years from now, Nikki Haley is going to be running for the Republican.
Yeah, it's going to be The Rock.
The Rock versus Nikki Haley?
Yes. Bye.